Heads up, this podcast isn't therapy. It's bold, blunt, and irreverent, but it's not a substitute for professional help. Full disclaimer is in the blurb below. Okay, as we begin Sex Without Soul Part 2, we'll pick up where we left off, and the next topic that I'll be discussing is revenge sex. So this is essentially where you say to yourself, I'll hurt you by hurting myself in someone else's bed. You think it's power, it's not, it's unresolved rage with lube. This is the Olympic sport of pretending you're over someone while secretly hoping they're watching and spiraling. The goal is to make them jealous. The result is that you feel hollow and they feel nothing. And some poor stranger thinks they had a great night. You don't want sex, you want vindication. And here's the kicker. If your orgasm is just a smoke signal to your ex, you're not winning, you're signaling grave distress. Watch me fake empowerment while emotionally self-harming in someone else's sheets. That's essentially what you're saying. Let's not lie to ourselves. This isn't about fun, it's about leverage. It's the internal scream of, you hurt me and now I'm going to prove you lost something. So you post the thirst trap. You text someone vaguely attractive whose name you can't quite remember. You light the match and you call it freedom. But psychodynamically, this is displaced aggression mixed with unprocessed grief, stirred into your cortisol system like a Molotov cocktail. You don't want sex, you want a reaction. You want them to hurt, or to miss you, or panic, or God forbid show up at your door and confess everything. Instead, you get silence and a hangover and a really sinking feeling that you just made yourself available to someone you wouldn't let house sit a budgie. So what's really going on? You're using someone else's body to try and regulate your rage. You're trying to bypass heartbreak with a performance of indifference, and you're chasing closure through climax and it never delivers. And deep down, you're hoping pain can be seduced into disappearing. So why it doesn't work? Because your ex isn't watching, because the new person thinks you're into them, and because revenge that costs your dignity isn't revenge. It's time to reflect, it's time to go deep, and it's time to take a break from dating and to allow yourself to grieve. And then we have validation-seeking sex. AKA, do you think I'm enough now? Oh, what if I take my clothes off? This one isn't about desire, this is about doubt. This is the sex you have, not because you're turned on, but because you're turned down, somewhere inside. It's not lust, it's loneliness. You're not craving a body, you're craving a mirror. You need to feel wanted, you need to feel seen. You need someone to look at you and think, God, I'd do anything for a taste of that. Because for a moment, in their eyes, you exist again. And maybe, just maybe, that means you're okay. So this is one of the most common and misunderstood reasons people have sex. It's often rooted in chronic self-doubt or a long history of conditional worth. They feel they need to be sexy, to be wanted, and to be valuable. Underneath, there's usually some version of, if I'm desirable, I must be lovable. If I'm good in bed, they'll stay. If I can blow their mind, maybe I won't have to show them my heart. It's attachment anxiety channeled through choreography. You're not performing for pleasure, you're performing for approval. You want praise more than the orgasm, and you want closeness, but you settle for attention. And afterwards, the high fades, the crash hits, and you're left wondering if they saw anything of you at all, or just the image you created to be worthy of being touched. It basically looks like this. You flirt harder when you're feeling low. You initiate sex when you're feeling unattractive, unchosen, or invisible. You chase emotionally unavailable people because the win feels more intoxicating. You feel powerful when someone wants you, and like nothing when they don't. You have sex and immediately analyze whether you are good enough. You scroll afterwards, waiting for praise. You've used orgasms to distract yourself from shame. You've dressed up your ache in lingerie and called it confidence. So the real fallout of validation sex is that it always leaves you with more questions than answers. Sure, you think the illusion of it feeling like a win at first is there, but you end up wondering, did they want you, or just the version you served up? Did you enjoy that, or did you just endure it in exchange for feeling chosen? And you will wonder why you felt so exposed when they leave, even though you agreed to absolutely everything. And worst of all, it reinforces the lie that your worth is negotiable, that your value is defined by who wants you, that the only way to feel good is to be seen through someone else's hunger. But hunger isn't love, and being desired is not the same as being cherished, and no amount of being wanted will ever silence the ache of feeling unworthy. So why might you want to actually look at this? Because every time you use sex as a self-esteem patch, you widen the wound. Because real validation, when you crave it, won't come from their hands, it'll come from your own spine, inside of you. Because someone can want your body and never once meet your soul, and because no orgasm will ever be strong enough to heal a broken sense of self. Essentially, when you use sex to feel like someone, you almost always wake up feeling like no one. And next we have emotionally detached relationships. So these are relationships where you have sex, you just don't know if you actually love or like the person. This one isn't explosive, it's eroding. It doesn't just burn you alive, it just slowly starves your nervous system of nourishment while everything looks fine on the outside. You're in a relationship, you're technically having sex, but somewhere along the way the emotional current dropped out. And now it's just repetition. The conversations are shallow. The eye contact is rare. The sex feels like maintenance. You're going through the motions, trying not to notice that your soul hasn't been in the room for months. And worse, neither of you wants to name it, because naming it might ruin the quiet contract you've both signed. Let's pretend this is still working, so we don't have to deal with what it means if it isn't. So what's actually happening? This is the psychodynamic equivalent of living with a roommate you once loved, but now you both just exchange bodily fluids and mutual avoidance. The sex still happens, but it's more about habit than hunger. You're not making love, you're marking time. You're staying physically tethered while emotionally estranged. Often, this dynamic shows up when one or both partners are conflict avoidant. There's been a major rupture that was never ever addressed, and intimacy has been too vulnerable, so detachment becomes safer. The relationship has actually shifted into a caretaking or performance model. And you equate sex with obligation, not desire. And so if you give your body, you do it, yes. But you become numb. Because it feels easier to comply than to confront. It's easier to submit than to speak, and easier to play the role than to break the frame. And what exactly does this feel like? Where you're touched but never met, you fake enjoyment just to keep the peace. You feel lonelier after sex than before. You look away during. You fantasize not about others, but about being alone and not having to do this anymore. Your body completely stops responding and you wonder, what's wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with you. Your body is just tired of pretending. And why does this matter? Because sex without emotional safety is a form of depletion. Because disconnection in bed is often a symptom of disconnection everywhere else. Because saying yes when you're numb rewires your nervous system to stop trusting your aliveness. And because the longer you ignore the ache, the harder it becomes to find your way back to yourself, let alone to each other. When you stay in a bed where you're not really seen, you start disappearing in slow motion, one yes at a time. Okay, and now we come to faking a relationship for sex. This one essentially says, I'll pretend I care if it gets me laid. And you'll pretend you believe me because you need to. This one's a slow, seductive form of emotional fraud. It's the bait and switch of modern intimacy. Perform commitment, extract sex, vanish emotionally once satisfied. And to be fair, it's not always malicious. Sometimes it's strategic, sometimes it's survival, sometimes it's a trauma pattern playing out with impeccable charm. But here's the truth. Someone's faking love, someone's hoping it's real, and both are clinging to a fantasy. This is classic manipulative attachment strategy. It often emerges in people who don't believe they can be chosen honestly, so they manufacture connection to gain access. They say the right things, they mirror your values, they express just enough vulnerability to pass as sincere. They curate a version of themselves that sounds like partnership, but feels like contradiction. Because something's always off. Too much too soon, too many promises with no follow-through, moments of deep intimacy, followed by emotional and physical absence. Why? Because it was never about connection, it was about access. If you're the one being played, you don't want to believe it, you see the cracks, but you fill them in with hope. You rewire their avoidance as trauma, you call their inconsistency depth, you make excuses because the sex feels electric and your loneliness feels unbearable. But deep down you know, they're not really here. They're performing presence, and you're performing okayness. If you're the one doing the playing, you might not think you're faking it. You might even convince yourself you could fall for them, maybe, someday. But you know you're not all in. You know what you want isn't the person. It's the supply of sex, of attention, of feeling powerful or needed or safe. You don't want their soul. You just want what it gives you access to. And you know what? That's a wound too. This hurts everyone because pretending to care fractures your own integrity and because being almost loved is its own kind of abandonment. Because when sex is extracted through performance, it becomes hollow, even when it's hot. Because emotional theatre always collapses, and when it does, the fallout is brutal. No one wins in this dynamic. One walks away feeling used, the other walks away feeling empty, and both wonder why intimacy never feels safe. If someone has to lie to be let in, they were never meant to be there. They weren't building a future with you. They were rehearsing sincerity long enough to get what they came for. And then we come to performative sex. This is everywhere in marriages, hookups, porn scripts, self-image. It's not about faking orgasms, it's about faking presence, faking power, faking desire, fake, 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 while your nervous system goes quietly numb. So performative sex is essentially, I don't feel anything, but I hope I look good doing it. This is the sex where choreography is flawless, but the intimacy is dead behind the eyes. Moans at the right time, moves copied from porn, or past praise, facial expressions that suggest a rapture, but internally, you're managing, performing, curating, surviving, not feeling, not syncing, not connecting. This is a theatre production, and you're both the cast and the stage. And what's actually happening here? Performative sex is what happens when your sense of self-worth is fused to performance. It's rooted in the belief, if I'm good at this, I'll be wanted. If I'm wanted, I'll be safe. If I'm safe, maybe I'll be loved. This is not about sensuality, it's about control. Control of image, control of outcome, control of rejection. Because if they're amazed by your sexual prowess, maybe they won't notice that you've never felt safe being real in bed. Maybe they'll stay. Maybe they won't leave like the others did when you stopped dazzling. And so you give them a show. You peacock, you arch, you breathe, you improvise, and your soul watches from the rafters thinking, we're doing this again, huh? And it shows up in various different ways. One, you could be hyper-focused on how you look instead of how you feel. Two, you try to blow their mind, not out of desire, but fear of not being good enough. Three, you fake orgasms to avoid awkwardness or disappointing them or actual communication. Four, you completely dissociate but still hit your marks like a well-rehearsed actor. Five, you feel powerful during, but weirdly deflated, flat, and irritable afterwards. And finally, six, you keep score. How long it lasted, how impressed they were, whether they said anything validating. Men and women do this equally, especially those who've been socialized to equate sexual performance with identity. If the erection is good and the partner finishes, then he's worthy. If not, the collapse is existential. And the cost of this? Well, performative sex shuts down the nervous system. It disconnects you from your own pleasure, it confuses approval with intimacy, and it turns sex into a test you must pass, instead of an experience you can melt into. Over time, it leads to body disconnection, sexual resentment, emotional fatigue, and a growing fear of being seen without the mask. Because here's the hidden grief. You don't know who you'd be in bed if you weren't performing. So if sex becomes something you do rather than something you feel, you lose access to your own aliveness. Because being admired isn't the same as being met. Because turning yourself into a porn star, a sex god, a tantric wizard might impress them, but it won't soothe your soul. And because you deserve a sexuality that includes you, not just the role you play for others. When sex becomes a performance, you stop actually participating and you start disappearing within your own body. So now I'll move on to sex as escape, where pleasure becomes painkiller and intimacy becomes anesthetic. This can be tender and terrifying. It's not loud like revenge sex. It's not shiny like performative sex. It's quiet, compulsive, and often mislabeled as just blowing off steam. But what it really is avoidance dressed up as intimacy. So when it comes to sex as escape, the person doesn't want connection, they want relief. Let's tell the truth. There's a kind of sex that doesn't come from desire, it comes from dysregulation, from heartbreak, from overstimulation, from that sharp, unnameable ache in the chest you can't quite get under. You're not chasing intimacy, you're fleeing yourself. Sex becomes a psychoactive substance, the most socially accepted one out there. No judgment, just observation. This is not about closeness, it's about sedation. So this is what therapists call regulation via override. When we use external stimuli to suppress internal overwhelm. The person isn't a person, they're a valve. And you're not engaging with your body to feel more, you're engaging to feel less. In that moment, sex becomes a kind of emotional anesthesia, not because you're broken, but because you're under-resourced. You don't have the scaffolding to hold what's arising, so you hand it to the moment, to the body, to the sensation. It's not sexual freedom, it's nervous system triage. And this shows up everywhere. In one-night stands that are initiated after complicated situations. In the long-term relationship where the sex is the only place that connection ever exists because talking feels too raw. In the hookup after a breakup where the body said yes, but the stomach said please no. And in the long-term relationships where there's no shared emotional intimacy anymore, but regular sex to numb the tension. It's also in the quiet sexual addiction that never looks like addiction because it's consensual. And it's present in the self-soothing masturbation session that ends in self-loathing. And it's also found in trauma survivors who confuse arousal with safety because that's how they first learned to cope. And it's also found in people with high sexual charisma but no ability to stay still with their own feelings. This is everywhere. It's in women who think they're empowered but still can't sit in silence. It's in men who reach for sex instead of tears. And it's in couples who make love after every fight without ever resolving any issue that was brought up by the fight. It's in friends with benefits who know deep down that someone's using someone to not feel alone. So how does this feel if you're brave enough to notice? Well, you're going to have the post-sex collapse, a strange hollowness that creeps in just after the high. You're going to have the sting of feeling like you weren't even there. And you're going to have full body shame that arrives in silence. You'll also have crying afterwards and not being able to explain why. Also lying beside someone who just touched your skin but never touched yourself. And going home and numbing further with food, scrolling, substances, anything to avoid the grief that's waiting. Why does this happen? Well, because sex works temporarily. It floods you with dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, even cortisol, which can briefly soothe anxiety, depression, grief, or rage. It's a hit, a drop, a silence in chaos. But it's definitely not resolution, it's displacement. You've shifted the ache, not healed it. Over time, this trains your nervous system to look outward, not inward. You learn that relief comes from performance, not presence, from being wanted, not being held. And eventually the body starts to numb. Sex stops being expansive, it becomes contractive. Essentially, it happens to you, not with you. So you might want to pause and reflect and rethink if your orgasm is the only way you know how to exhale and your system is in trouble. Because using sex to escape emotion is like, oh, I don't know, pouring a bit of cedar cream on a massive, gigantic wound and calling it healing when it really needs sutures. Because pleasure is sacred and not when it's weaponized against your own loneliness. And because what you're really craving is presence, safety, to be able to cry and not be left, to be held, not entered, to be seen without being stripped. Sex as escape is one of the most profound relational wounds masquerading as fun. But naming it, that's step one in taking your body back. If you keep using sex to run from yourself, one day you'll very much wake up feeling untouched and hollow by every touch you've ever had while your skin crawls. It's like wandering into a desert, a kind of silent erosion that leaves two people touching absolutely nothing but routine and resentment. So we'll wrap up part 2 there. Thanks for listening to Soul Path Alchemy, and I will continue with part 3 of Sex Without Soul tomorrow. Again, if you felt something resonate with you, if you recognized yourself in any of what I talked about, know you're not alone. And if this episode spoke to something unspoken in you, share it with someone who might need it too. It's how the silence is broken, and it's how individuals can come home to themselves. If you like these topics and would like to listen to more monologues like this, you can follow or subscribe to the podcast. It helps others find it, and it lets me know that these conversations matter. So until next time, I'm Annie. Thank you for listening. Be gentle with your body, be honest with your soul, and remember, you don't have to trade yourself for connection again. Have a really great day. Bye for now.